5 times your money in 4 minutes. Is that even possible? That's our story for today when it comes to Tesla and its entry into the S&P this afternoon. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Well, welcome to our Super Bowl today. I want to thank our Patreon supporters as well as our subscribers. If you enjoy the show, please take time to like and subscribe. So about 11 o'clock last night, I got a call from a good buddy, a trading buddy of mine, and he related to me that he'd actually watched a show regarding the fact that all of the S&P purchases for today are going to happen in the last 5 minutes of the day. So after hearing him and his excitement about what's going to happen and the fact that there are a lot of options that are being traded associated with this, I decided that it was time to do a show today. We did not do one yesterday because we didn't have a lot to add. But now that Tesla's stock price is up nicely this morning, was up nicely yesterday, we can kind of see the trend of the sort of World War III type battle that'll happen in the last 5 minutes of the trading day. So I wanted to relay a number of ideas, including what I think would be a good trade here. And I want to start it off with a couple of paragraphs. Barron's has an article out today. And what they talked about is just 2 paragraphs. It says, the S&P 500 is weighted by market capitalization adjusted for number of shares available for trading, which for Tesla is roughly 80% of the shares. So in Tesla's case, because Elon owns 20% and it's not available for trading, you have to take that out of the equation of how many shares that they can trade. The rest is held by insiders, including Elon Musk, as I stated. Tesla current market value is roughly $610 billion. About $490 billion of that is available to trade. And the total market value of the S&P 500 is roughly $32 trillion. All those numbers work out to a 1.5% weighing for Tesla in the index. Tesla is already the most valuable company ever added at a weighting of 1.5%. So what's interesting about this is that I wanted you to hear sort of basic statistics, because one of the things we often talk about is that there's an Indian proverb that suggests that anytime, or there were 5 blind men, and all those blind men were trying to figure out how an elephant looked while touching different parts of that elephant. One, the leg, the trunk, etc. Each of whom knew exactly what was happening and how the elephant looked based on the portion of the elephant that they were holding on to. So what I wanted to suggest here is that because there's not clear defined, hey, how this is going to work, little bits of information that pop up can really make a difference in terms of what you might consider doing. So what came up last evening and got my trading buddy excited is the fact that the buying to fit the S&P will start 5 minutes before the close today and end at the close. So the comment he shared, I was like, wow, that's amazing. The reason I said that was amazing is forget about everybody else's shares. If we only look at the S&P purchase shares, that's actually $80 billion worth of shares. In theory, if you throw in side stuff related to other entities that have to get in that are not officially listed as mandatory S&P, in theory, we're talking something like $100 billion in shares that they've got to pull off in only 5 minutes. And so the answer is we have the computing power. It's very easy with the supercomputers used to execute that many shares in that short a period of time. There are 2 problems that I've identified with this. The first problem is, and maybe the biggest one is, where are these shares coming from? The reason I share this is that we know that 80% of the shares are available for trading, right? And then at least in my mind, half the shares, if not more, are indice attached, meaning that there are a large number of funds that actually can't sell because if they sell, it unbalances them relative to their weighting for all the indices they're a part of. So we're dropped down to 40% of the shares that are out there. In theory, it could be higher. Let's say it's of the remaining shares, over half of them are part of indices, which I think is possible because of how big the S&P is. And some of the other indexes that people are tying their investment to and have been making great returns without the risk of owning an individual stock. So where this leaves us is, as we've done in calculations previously, we have to deduct Elon's, then we have to deduct theoretically at least half the remaining shares. So we're down to 35% of the shares left to trade. And then what starts to happen is we get into this zone of, well, will the large managers who own the remaining shares be incentivized to sell? The answer is those folks are theoretically lining up all the shares necessary to execute this giant trade. The reason is that the large institutions that represent the bulk of the remaining shares are, the way their managers are structured, they're required to, in essence, sell out at some point and not remaining those shares unless they're index sort of mandated to stay in. So this is where we're at. So let's say after all the indices, et cetera, we're in a position now where a lot of shares are going to trade hands all at the same time. And in my mind, this is going to cause a spike in the stock price. In theory, it could cause a drop in the stock price because a whole bunch of people want to sell and get out at whatever the price is. On the other side of that, there'll be people trying to buy because they need allocation to get their S&P weighting right. So what I think is going to happen here is, because we can see that $80 billion worth of buy, I think it spikes the stock up. Now, so the question mark that comes out is, I'm calling it 100 billion. It is 80 billion relative to the weighting of Tesla currently. So the problem that I'm seeing happen right now is the number, because of the entities that are holding on to their shares and the number of shares that are needed to be purchased, it's my argument that a problem could pop up, which is there are offers being made to buy shares, but there aren't any shares available to be bought. So kind of what happens at that point? And things can happen like they freeze the stock and they wait until they can get an orderly market. And then you would restart once you have that orderly market recreated. Well, I guess I'm sort of stunned here because Tesla's trading 48 million shares a day. And you need 120 million shares to satiate what the S&P folks need. What's not clear is it's assumed that the price will spike and the holders of the shares will simply give up their shares and everything will be orderly in process. I believe that what's going to happen is that it's entirely possible. So if we said best case scenario, and we've given you this math before, add up 50% of the shares owned by institutions. 25, or I'm calling it 25%. Ron Baer and all these other folks that are Tesla focused are not selling either. So I think about 25% of those folks are not going to sell. And so when we look at general numbers right now in terms of shares available to trade, the problem that's popping up that I see is that if the S&P people want their shares, once they get them and their shares represent 25% of the shares out there, from what I can see, there's only 3 to 5% of the shares left to be purchased. So remember we talked about the fact that when a house is sold, 10% of those houses are trading hands annually. What happens when only those 10% dictate the value of the other 90% of the homes? So in this case, what if we get down to 3 to 5% of the Tesla shares available to do anything with by anyone. How could this happen? Very easy. The managers of those large funds just decide we aren't selling, even if you raise our price. The index people are going to say this, but the theory right now is a number of those entities are going to hit their target prices, and they're simply going to say, hey, we're out right now. Part of the reason why I was suggesting that they may not sell out is that a large number of these funds have to transition Tesla shares between different funds within those organizations, be it Fidelity, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, whoever it is. There are funds that have to buy, and they have the shares in other funds, and they're going to make a decision. Have we hit our target point for price or performance of company, et cetera, that prompts us to say, hey, we're getting a great price for our product or for our shares owned, we're going to sell them. So that is, in theory, how this is going to work. And the one question mark is, what if they decide not to sell? Their S&P funds have to go out into the marketplace and, in essence, buy 20% of Tesla's shares. And from a bunch of different quarters, there's between 20 and 28% of the shares that are beyond the control of Elon as well as the large institutions. So this, I think, is going to be a barn burner. I do think the price is going to spike because we know that those large institutions do have to buy to get their S&P weighting proper. And then we won't even discuss the fact that as the stock price rises, in theory, how Tesla hits the S&P, because it's a market weighting, for those shares. You also have the possibility that, hey, Tesla was an extra 100, 200 points today, could force those guys into even more buying. So everything that I'm seeing suggests that this is going to be a barn burner day. So where does the 5 times your money in one day potentially come from? Where I think that shows up is if we get later part of the day and Tesla stock price is accelerating into the purchases that have to be done, what I see potentially happening is that you could actually buy call options, let's say 6 minutes before the close, and sell those options, a minute or 30 seconds prior to close. And because of that $80 billion buy that's occurring, you're seeing a maxi 30, 50, 100 point jump in the stock price. On the stock price side, that's only 10%, or that's only 6 to 10% increase in value. But on the option side, that's like 10 times your money. So these are the kind of question marks that are out there. For those of you, we've recommended both Peter Lynch's book and Taleb's book on Black Swan trading. One of the things that he recommends is to consider simply, so there are a number of firms that have taken on Taleb's trading technique, which is all he does is walk out there and take a certain amount of money, call it $10, $20, $30, $50,000, and their funds simply buy into a trade that they can see clearly. The trade may not go well, but what they're saying is, hey, we're putting up 10 grand. If it goes bad, we just lost 10 grand. If it goes well, we pick up 10 or 20 times the value of that output. And so what they're doing with their trading process is simply doing a number of these trades. And if they get, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 right, you can see how the numbers work out. Basically, you put up some money, you could lose it, but you're getting 4 or 5 times your money, and therefore it's totally worth the risk that you took. And I think that's the case here. There's a whole bunch of ways you could play this. You could buy call options into next week. You could buy just call options for today. I would suggest a simple route might be to buy your calls 6 to 10 minutes prior to market close as we're going into this. Then as you get to about a minute, prior to the close of the market, I suggest at that point you either buy puts to hedge because I think you're now at a very steep price for the stock. And if you wanted to get crazy with it, I would say buy calls, let the stock price rise up, and then buy puts on it into next week and sell your calls, capturing that profit. And then if the stock decides to drop dramatically, then you make money on the puts as well. Dramatic meaning it could give back that 1 to 200 that it picks up in that last 3 to 5 minutes in the same amount of time on Monday. So you kind of cover both sides for some ginormous returns. So I think everybody's going to have their opinion on how to trade this. And in general, I think that's my opinion. The open question right now is what's going to happen on Monday? And the reason that pops up is that if all those managers have said, we got a great price and we're out, there's plenty of shares around. So on Monday, after the spike, in theory, the stock price would fall because you don't have that buying pressure anymore. And the peak that the stock price hit, you should be on the other side of that, and therefore the stock price falls. That totally makes sense. The other scenario there is, what if the institutions chose not to sell those shares? Now you have an interesting problem because the stock price has spiked and it allowed certain people to get in and get their weighting of Tesla as part of their S&P purchase. But guess what? One of the ways in which stock prices fall on the other side is if a bunch of people who now own it decided to sell. The problem I'm seeing with that is that the float for the stock that's left over, if the institutions stay in, is so small that I just don't see where the stock price falls dramatically because of this issue. So we're going to find out what the answer is to this today as we close out today. But if you're into investing, if you're in trading, I really think this is the Super Bowl, because if you execute, for example, what I just described, picking up your calls, waiting until 2 or 3 minutes before the close, or even a minute to make sure your trade, there are things that happen, like you're in a trade and the market gets so heated that you can't get execution, is a possibility. So this is why, instead of waiting till the last 30 seconds, you may have to wait and get out in the last, let's say, 2 minutes. And that way you can put your trade in, and then its execution will happen in that minute, rather than you get caught in the trade and it's not executed. So that's a possibility. And so I just think that this is it in terms of the great opportunity to make a lot of money in a very short period of time. I have to say that I'm kind of stunned that the market makers are claiming that this is going to be easy for them to do this trading. And the reason is that, in theory, you could go ahead and line up all the shares that you're going to purchase ahead of time. That way, when you hit that time point, it's no big deal. You simply match your large buys with large sells, and we're done. The issue, though, is that what happens if the price spikes dramatically? Do the sellers decide to sell at those prices, or will they hold out longer than they stated to the people they've talked with? There's all these question marks about what's going to happen at the end of the day. And I think that if you have an option strategy going where you're taking advantage of that environment, I just think it's going to be hugely lucrative. Now that Tesla has bounced up to about 660, which is the target price I had that we shared with our Patreon supporters at the beginning of the week, we're sort of in the hunt for 700. Another sort of counter variable to this whole thing is market maker manipulation of the price of certain stocks, especially Tesla and especially today. One of the subplots to this is there are 40,000 calls at $700. The market makers have, I think it's 10 or 20 billion reasons why they want to keep Tesla stock price below 700 by the close. The problem that's showing up right now, though, is because of all those shares that have to be purchased, the amount of dollars it would take to battle that tsunami of buying coming at the situation is so huge that I think they could easily run over the folks trying to prevent that 700 strike price hitting, especially, and there's a possibility that thing could bounce up to 800, 900. I've suggested even $1,000 for a brief period. That's why having sort of a put strategy headed into this, I think, is a good idea, where you're letting your calls float up. You immediately buy puts while you're in the middle of that. And then as the whole thing starts to crash, you now are selling your calls and let the puts sit there and just absorb all of that money being handed out to you on the back end. So this is sort of the expectation I have of what could occur. I think that there'll be wild swings throughout the day. I think it'll be really interesting, educational, and profitable if you're able to hit it right. There are also a large number of people that I've spoken with who are like, hey, I'm long into January, into February, even leaps on Tesla. I think that's a smart way to do it because you have a lower risk profile going on. You're picking up nice money in the process, and you can just wait it out and enjoy some nice profits in the process. That's also a very wise plan. What I was kind of targeting with my initial strategy was the fact that instead of committing $100, $200, $300, $500 million to it, which would be a longer strategy, if you will, I was really targeting, let's look at some very short trading methods where if you only have $3,000 to $5,000 to work with, what might you do to get a really big score for the day? And these are some ideas that one might want to play with. Please note on our channel, we appreciate your like and subscribe. We also do daily updates, and today we'll probably end up with 3 updates for our Patreon supporters, sort of early after open, midday, and afternoon. We also want to encourage you to constructive comments are appreciated, non-constructive comments are not. So please don't get blocked from my channel, and please like and subscribe. We now bounce into our usual health tips. I'm about to do my 25 leg lifts, and I was going to show you my leg weights that I have here. And so the first recommendation from University of Michigan doc was 25 leg lifts a day, strengthening the quad muscles, reducing the chance of knee issues and knee operations as you age. Number 2, 60% of the 200 doctors we surveyed are all doing some kind of fasting diet. The 5-2 is one of them that's very popular. We had another doc from NIH suggest that you only want to eat on half the calendar of the day. So in a 12-hour period, eat during that period, but not the other 12 hours as a way to give your body, recovery time, but it is another form of fasting. So we have a number of people that have showed off different techniques in this regard, and those are them. Another one of our docs recommended, he threw out a recommendation of if you're going to do lovemaking that evening, make sure you eat a salad or some very small meal, because that will limit blood flow to that area of your anatomy. If you have a very large meal, all the blood flow is to your stomach, not other areas, and therefore you'll find that the blood flow redirection will make for non-fun, or it's not a fun deal for your body, basically. Third item is at least an SPF of 30 or better. Fourth item would be our kidney doc suggested no more than once a week fried foods. Your body stores that fried foods as an unknown substance near your organs, encouraging type 2 diabetes. So we're also open to other recommendations you might have if you're a physician or health practitioner of some sort. I would recommend that. I guess the last one I wanted to mention again that I need to put into rotation, as I have a good friend of mine whose dad is a doctor. She had challenging issues with her weight for a long time. And what she said to me is after years of going from doctor to doctor unsuccessfully, she then was recommended by a doctor in Boston to try for a certain period. I think he or she gave her 2 or 3 months. And the rule that she gave her was that you're not allowed to eat anything that you can't pronounce on the back of the box. So she went into this process and was successfully able to lose a lot of weight in a short period of time once she embraced that eating discipline. So that's no high fructose corn syrup. There are all these different things, as you know, that are blended in. And that might be something to consider if you wanted to consider processes possibly that might help in the weight management area. I wanted to note that there's something else that I read about, but I couldn't find it, so I couldn't include it in our show, and that is something that I learned that's called a 16-minute rule. So if you eat something, your body takes 16 minutes to register your brain that you've eaten and that you're potentially going to be full. So one of the things you'll notice is if you want to gain a lot of weight, the way to do it is eat a lot of food in a short period of time. Body won't recognize you've eaten for 16 minutes. On the flip side, if you're trying to lose weight, you might want to try that process of try eating something and then wait 15, 16 minutes before you eat the rest of the meal. And what you'll notice is that you're kind of feeling full, and that fullness will reduce the amount you end up eating, and you won't feel non-satisfied. So I read it. It needs to be added. We have some really smart people on the channel, so I expect folks to sort of chime in on where this came from. But I did read it, and I found it to be effective for me in terms of slowing down eating, and then that facilitates being full, but with the less food having to be eaten. Something to consider. Any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir French, lehit road, Hebrew, hoda, hafez, Farsi, Zdravstvuyte, hello in Russian, ni hao ma, hello in Chinese, namaste, Hindi, hey do, Swedish, ohayou gozaimasu, Japanese, mahalo, Hawaiian, and in Jamaica we say, enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Bye for now. And we very much look forward to your constructive comments.